A young girl was found along the shoreline, without a name, without family coming forward to claim her. Yet the entire city seemed to come to a standstill over one haunting question: how could a child disappear for months without anyone ever reporting her missing? In the northeastern United States, there is a coastal city that has existed for hundreds of years, where history and modern life are woven together through every small neighborhood: Boston, the capital of Massachusetts, a major center for education, healthcare, and research, and also a place where many residential communities coexist, each with its own distinct rhythm of life. Among them, Dorchester is a large, family-oriented neighborhood, marked by quiet streets and an everyday routine that appears calm and uneventful. It was here, on June 8, 2012, that Bella Neve Amoroso Bond was born, the daughter of Joseph Amoroso and Rochelle Bond. Bella's father lived in Florida and had a past marked by numerous legal troubles, remaining largely absent from his daughter's life, aside from a few brief phone calls, and he never met her in person. Her mother, Rochelle, struggled with severe dependence on harmful substances and led an unstable lifestyle. She had previously lost custody of 2 other children and had repeatedly moved in and out of state and county correctional facilities. During her pregnancy with Bella, Rochelle was still in a state of profound instability and had at one point been detained for mandatory treatment. Before Joseph left Boston to return to Florida, the two met during the Occupy Boston demonstrations in November 2011 and lived temporarily in a tent at Dewey Square. Bella was conceived during that period, but unlike many protesters driven by social ideals, Joseph and Rochelle at the time viewed their makeshift shelter in the heart of Boston simply as a means to continue their deeply troubled way of life. Bella and her mother lived together in Boston, Massachusetts during the first 11 months of Bella's life, a period in which the two stayed at a family shelter under mandatory supervision and support from social services. In 2012 and 2013, the Department of Children and Families (DCF) intervened in Bella's case twice due to concerns about inadequate care. However, both cases were closed after a few months when no immediate signs of danger were identified. After that, they spent another 3 months at a different shelter before moving into apartment 115 on Maxwell Street in the Mattapan neighborhood in October 2013 through a state housing assistance program. Rochelle personally decorated Bella's room with monkey-themed images, an animal the little girl was especially fond of. And the two lived there for the next 20 months. Neighbors described Rochelle as someone who showed a great deal of affection toward her daughter, while Bella was remembered as a cheerful, energetic child who was often seen playing and laughing. Aside from the use of some mild substances and prescribed medication, Rochelle was not documented as being involved with other harmful substances during this period. And in her own way, she made an effort to maintain a more stable life in order to care for Bella. Not long afterward, Rochelle met a man named Michael McCarthy when the two happened to strike up a conversation outside a pharmacy. And from their initial interactions involving the exchange of medication, the relationship gradually became romantic. By February 2015, Michael officially moved into the apartment. Although some later sources referred to him as Bella's stepfather, that description is inaccurate, as Rochelle and Michael were never married, and the relationship did not last long enough for him to truly become a stable presence in the child's life. Rochelle gradually became drawn to the way Michael presented himself as insightful, especially through his stories about spirituality and unseen energy. He often claimed to sense negative energy surrounding her and used the burning of sage as a way to cleanse the space inside the apartment. Michael also asserted that he could help ease Rochelle's physical discomfort through spiritual practices such as Reiki, holding his hands above her body and instructing her to focus her thoughts on a positive color. And Rochelle believed that this brought some degree of relief. Not long after Michael moved in, his childhood friend Michael Sprinsky stayed at the apartment for about 2 weeks. And to avoid confusion between the two men with the same first name, this friend was referred to as Mr. Sprinsky. Mr. Sprinsky had grown up with Michael and had spent a period drifting alongside him in the South Boston area. But during his stay at Rochelle's apartment, he observed that Bella was still a smiling child who played naturally, and that the living space at the time was relatively orderly. However, Mr. Sprinsky became increasingly uneasy as Michael frequently spoke about dark forces and portrayed himself as having the ability to drive them away, believing that this fixation had gone beyond normal interest and had turned into an obsession. As spring arrived that year, Rochelle again struggled to maintain control of her life and, together with Michael, fell back into a cycle involving harmful substances, causing the atmosphere in the apartment to grow more chaotic. During his visits, Mr. Sprinsky noticed that Bella was receiving less attention, and at times he was the one preparing food for her. Rochelle occasionally used inappropriate methods to discipline her daughter, while Michael ignored the situation entirely and at times even imposed isolating punishments, stemming from his distorted belief that the child was being influenced by negative forces. Even so, during visits in April and May 2015, Michael's brother Joseph McCarthy still remembered Bella as a typical 2-year-old girl, cheerful, healthy, and showing no signs that she was being subjected to dangerous treatment. However, those around Rochelle gradually began to notice clear changes in her. Previously, she regularly updated social media with photos of herself and Bella. But after Michael entered her life, those accounts fell almost completely silent, with no trace of the child remaining, and Rochelle became increasingly withdrawn and less engaged with the outside world. Around the same time, several neighbors reported that they would occasionally hear the sound of a child crying through the apartment's thin walls. In early June 2015, Rochelle struggled to get Bella to sleep. One night, after putting her to bed quite late, the little girl repeatedly left the room, and Rochelle had to carry her back to bed several times. When both adults heard noises coming from the darkened room, Michael said he would handle it himself and went inside, leaving the door partially open. Just minutes later, Rochelle felt that something was wrong and followed him. And when she entered the room, she found Bella lying motionless on the bed in a critical condition. A severe act of violence had occurred, leaving the child unresponsive, her appearance visibly altered and in a state of panic. Rochelle tried desperately to help her daughter, but the situation had already moved beyond her ability to control. When all efforts to help proved unsuccessful, Rochelle panicked and picked Bella up in her arms with the intention of leaving the apartment to seek help. But according to her later statements, she was violently restrained and seriously threatened by Michael, pushing the situation completely out of control. Amid the chaos, Bella was believed to have slipped from her mother's grasp, and Rochelle lost consciousness. When she came to, Rochelle found herself lying on the living room couch, overwhelmed with terror and too afraid to attempt escape out of fear of what Michael might do next. She soon drifted back into a dazed state and later regained consciousness when Michael forced her to use a harmful substance. Something records indicate Rochelle was in no condition to resist. In desperation, Rochelle confronted him about what had happened to her daughter, and Michael responded with distorted explanations, rooted in his delusional beliefs. Michael then drove Rochelle away in a car, In the back seat were several heavy objects and a blue duffel bag containing Bella's remains. A sight that sent Rochelle into panic and led to her being attacked again and losing consciousness once more. When Rochelle woke up the next time, the car was stopped in a desolate area near a pier, and Michael, along with the bag and the weights, was no longer inside the vehicle. Moments later, he returned from the direction of the water, drove away. And Rochelle realized they were in the City Point area of South Boston. In the days that followed, Rochelle repeatedly spoke of her daughter's death in anguish, but Michael continued to repeat his terrifying justifications and issued constant threats, leading Rochelle to believe that if she went to the authorities, she too would be in danger. Consumed by fear and sinking deeper into avoidance through harmful substances, Rochelle did not report what had happened, while Michael maintained near constant control over her, only beginning to leave the apartment for short periods later on, at which point she was given a phone with limited functionality so that he could continue monitoring and contacting her. On June 25, 2015, a woman walking her dog along the shoreline of Deer Island, near Boston, Massachusetts, discovered a tightly tied trash bag containing the remains of a very young girl, carefully wrapped in 2 blankets. The child was wearing white leggings with black polka dots, and inside the bag was a zebra print blanket, details that would later become crucial clues in the investigation. The girl had a small frame, with weight and height consistent with a toddler, and although the remains retained their basic form, indicators suggested that the incident had occurred sometime earlier. At first, authorities were unable to determine whether the area was connected to any additional evidence, so K-9 units were deployed to search the surrounding vicinity, but nothing further was found at the scene. News of the discovery spread quickly, and within a short time, local residents spontaneously created a temporary memorial along the shoreline, filling it with dolls, stuffed animals, and flowers, a quiet and collective expression of grief for a little life whose name was still unknown. Within just hours of the discovery of the young girl's remains, the case quickly drew widespread media attention, and because her identity was still unknown, she was temporarily referred to as Baby Doe. A forensic examination was conducted on July 3rd, but it was unable to reach a definitive conclusion regarding the cause of her death. Tests showed no presence of harmful substances or alcohol in her system, and no cleaning chemicals were detected either. However, during a more detailed analysis, Henry Nields noted several signs of injury on the body, including bruising on the arms, abdomen, and legs. Investigators initially believed the incident had occurred at least 1 week prior to the discovery, but later information raised the possibility that the remains had been stored in a cold environment for an extended period before being brought to Deer Island. Although the outward appearance suggested the event may not have happened long before, natural post-mortem changes made visual identification impossible, and exposure to water rendered fingerprint collection unviable. Investigators determined that the victim was a very young girl, but in the early stages they were unable to draw firm conclusions about her race or family background. After further analysis, it was considered most likely that she was white and may have been of Hispanic descent. Items found with the remains including clothing identified as the Circo brand, commonly sold at Target stores, a blanket believed to have been manufactured by Cannon Mills and sold at Kmart, and an elastic headband were all treated as significant investigative clues. Based on physical characteristics, experts estimated that the child was between 3 and 5 years old, with wavy brown hair measuring approximately 14 inches in length, indicating it had not been cut for a considerable period of time. Her ears were pierced, and no distinctive birthmarks or scars were documented. Overall, The findings suggested that she had received a relatively adequate level of care during her life, with no evidence of malnutrition or signs of prolonged mistreatment. Alongside DNA testing, authorities also conducted forensic pollen analysis and isotope testing of water and pollen samples from the scene, leading them to conclude that the child had primarily lived in an urban environment, most likely the Boston area, as traces of pine pollen and soot were consistently present across the samples. More in-depth analyses of her hair and tooth enamel further suggested that she may have traveled across multiple locations, not only within the 6 states of New England, but possibly even beyond, reflecting a short life that was not anchored to any single, permanent place. The following day, data showed that Michael made multiple calls from the downtown Boston area to the phone he had given Rochelle, while location records traced his movements leaving Mattapan at approximately 9:47 a.m., then traveling to South Boston and appearing near the Reserve Channel at 9:53 a.m. Meanwhile, investigators continued working to identify Baby Doe, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children produced a computer-generated facial reconstruction to recreate what the child may have looked like, which was then released publicly. When the image, along with identifying details such as the leggings and the blanket, was posted on the Facebook page of the Massachusetts State Police, its reach exceeded all expectations, drawing more than 46 million views in just a few days. Public interest quickly spread beyond the United States, triggering a profound wave of empathy, as many people voluntarily offered to help cover burial expenses should the child remain unidentified. One funeral home even pledged to handle the burial so that she would not be laid to rest in an unmarked grave. And the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority also expressed its intention to place a memorial bench as a way of honoring the child's brief yet deeply haunting presence along this shoreline. The United States Coast Guard analyzed tidal currents within Boston Harbor in an effort to determine where the child's remains might have drifted from. But because investigators could not establish how long she had been in the water, there was insufficient data to trace a point of origin. By mid-July and into August, authorities increasingly leaned toward the conclusion that the remains had been placed directly along the shoreline of Deer Island, rather than carried there by currents, as the degree of natural post-mortem change did not appear severe. The discovery site was located near a wastewater treatment facility and in an area with regular foot traffic from workers and residents, leading to the theory that whoever brought the bag may have chosen nighttime hours to avoid drawing attention. At the same time, investigators received dozens of tips from the public and reviewed the status of approximately 20 girls in the same age range, all of whom were confirmed to be safe, while numerous other missing child cases were systematically ruled out. When database comparisons failed to yield a match, authorities increasingly considered the possibility that the child had never been reported missing at all, perhaps because her family was unaware of her absence, or because she came from a marginalized living situation, with investigators not ruling out the possibility that her relatives themselves had experienced unrecorded personal tragedies. To me, this case shows that when warning signs are ignored for too long from the family, from those around the child, and even from child protection systems, the tragedy that follows is no longer the failure of one individual, but the consequence of a collective silence. On July 10th, during an exchange on CNN, host Anderson Cooper interviewed John Walsh, the co-founder of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, about the Baby Doe case. In that conversation, Walsh stated that someone certainly knew the child's identity, and based on his experience with similar cases, the person most directly connected is often the closest caregiver, such as the mother or the mother's partner, in situations where tragedies can stem from an unintended incident or prolonged lack of care. explaining why the child had not yet been identified. Walsh suggested that many people avoid working with police out of fear that their private lives will be exposed, or that they themselves will come under scrutiny. He also pointed out that the facial reconstruction, while highly realistic, had inadvertently created confusion, as many people mistook it for an actual photograph and repeatedly reported sightings of the child alive, generating numerous false leads, including a claim from a man who said he had seen a child resembling Baby Doe at a laundromat in November 2014. Meanwhile, within closer circles, Mr. Sprinsky, a friend of Michael, asked both Michael and Rochelle about Bella's whereabouts in June and was told that the child was staying with Rochelle's sister. And then in July, when Michael's brother Joseph McCarthy asked the same question, they claimed that Bella was with her father for the summer. On July 16, 2015, Rochelle appeared in housing court to contest an eviction order. And throughout that time, Michael repeatedly texted her warnings not to cite the need for housing for her child, as doing so could draw the involvement of the Department of Children and Families. Just days later, on July 20th, public attention surrounding Baby Doe continued to intensify, as a total of 80 billboards calling for the child's identification were erected across 50 different locations throughout Massachusetts. By July 25th, dozens of residents gathered together on Deer Island for a silent candlelight vigil, with no speeches or slogans, coming together simply to mourn and remember a small life lost without a name or clear answers. On September 9th, Bella's biological father, Joseph Amoroso, appeared at Rochelle's apartment hoping to see his daughter, and under the close supervision of Michael McCarthy, Rochelle said that Bella was visiting her godparents in Cape Cod. At approximately 11:50 p.m. on September 15, 2015, Joseph returned and knocked on the door for an extended period of time, eventually speaking with Rochelle outside while Michael watched tensely from a window. The following day, when Michael was admitted to the hospital for treatment related to a health issue, Rochelle, emotionally overwhelmed, broke down in tears and told Michael Sprinsky, Michael's longtime friend, the full account of what had happened, admitting that Michael was responsible for the tragedy involving Bella. After hearing her story, Sprinsky independently searched for information about Baby Doe and recognized the distinctive blanket associated with Bella. He then texted Michael to confront him, only to receive denials and messages attempting to shift blame onto the Department of Children and Families. On September 17, 2015, Mr. Sprinsky shared his suspicions with a probation officer, stating that the child found was in fact Bella Bond, and when speaking with the Massachusetts State Police, he provided Rochelle's address along with the full text message exchanges with Michael, leading to the issuance of a search warrant for the apartment on Maxwell Street in the Mattapan neighborhood.
I was like, wow. I'm like, these two sick. They're animals.
They brought me to the place right near where the Sprinskys and Michael McCarthy grew up.
This is significant. As a teenager, me, Mike, a lot of other people used to come down here and drink. I spent a lot of childhood and teenage years down here.
When you heard this is where her body was dumped, what went through your mind?
Shock and disgust.
When she heard the pounding knock at the door, Rochelle looked outside, realized law enforcement was present, and panicked, fleeing the apartment through the rear exit. Afterward, she met up with Joseph and, in a state of distress, told him that Bella had died following an incident connected to both of them falling back into the use of harmful substances. The two discussed finding an attorney and planning to report what had happened, but first stopped at Joseph's mother's home to stay overnight, until police located them and made contact the following day. It was during questioning on September 18, 2015, that Rochelle finally admitted the full sequence of events leading up to and following Bella's tragedy. As previously described, around the same time, Michael was also questioned and acknowledged that he had stayed at Rochelle's apartment, describing it as a 2-bedroom unit and stating that she lived alone, though others occasionally stayed overnight. When asked who used the bedrooms, he volunteered that Rochelle's daughter had been taken by Child Protective Services. When pressed for details about when and under what circumstances that occurred, Michael repeatedly deflected, saying only that Rochelle had complained about Bella's father and claimed that a man had shown up and caused a disturbance at the apartment a few nights earlier. When questioned further, he stated that sometime after Easter, he returned one day and Bella was no longer there, and Rochelle told him that authorities had taken the child. Michael also claimed that his girlfriend said she had been warned she would not regain custody after the agency intervened due to an inappropriate disciplinary incident. When asked directly whether he had ever witnessed Rochelle treating Bella roughly, Michael said no. And when police informed him that the child was deceased, he appeared surprised, denied having any knowledge of the incident, and rejected claims that he had been in the South Boston area or Boston Harbor during the relevant period.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Mike. I'm just trying to figure out. I can't comprehend how a child like that could get hurt. Killed, right?
Killed?
You don't know she's dead?
No.
You don't know Bella's dead?
No.
Really?
No.
Huh. She's not?
Not to my knowledge.
Are you sure?
Positive.
You didn't drive over to East Boston?
No.
Southie?
No.
Boston Harbor?
No.
No?
No.
Mike, we've been handling this investigation for months. It's been all over the news. We're here right now talking to you. This is not some sort of, we're homicide detectives. Okay, we've been doing this for a long time. Okay? This is the real deal. This is your chance to get out from under this. Okay, we know what went wrong. We know what happened to Bella.
I don't think you do know what happened to Bella. She's sitting there basically saying I did something, so you don't know what happened to her.
Then you tell me what happened to her.
I have no idea.
Based on Rochelle's statement, police went to the City Point area, where a pier leads directly into the Reserve Channel, located approximately 300 yards from where Michael had lived as a teenager and frequently spent time with friends. After only a few minutes of underwater searching, about 5 feet from the pier, a diver with the Massachusetts State Police located a duffel bag along with several weighted objects, including a weight that matched one found in a weight set recovered from Michael's father's home. At a subsequent court hearing, representatives from the United States Coast Guard Search and Rescue Team stated that it was highly likely Bella's remains had traveled with the current from the Reserve Channel to Deer Island on the same day the incident occurred. Based on the evidence collected, Michael McCarthy and Rochelle Bond were taken into custody and held, with Michael facing the most serious charge related to causing the tragedy, while Rochelle was held responsible for her role following the incident. Later, she was also charged with fraud for continuing to receive public assistance from the Department of Transitional Assistance after becoming aware of her daughter's death. The couple was arraigned on September 21, 2015, with Michael McCarthy being held without bail, while Rochelle Bond was detained on bail set at $1 million. Authorities later issued an additional search warrant for the apartment at 115 Maxwell Street in the Mattapan neighborhood, where on January 6, 2016, a K-9 unit reportedly detected evidence consistent with human remains in the area of the apartment's refrigerator. During the early stages of the case, Rochelle denied all allegations related to her daughter's death, but after 13 months, on February 10, 2017, she changed her plea and accepted responsibility for her role after the incident in exchange for cooperating as a witness against Michael McCarthy, who had been continuously held in custody since September 2015, received credit for time served. And during court proceedings in early June 2017, Rochelle was sentenced to 2 years of probation. Over the course of the legal proceedings, Mr. Sprinsky's attorney provided prosecutors with troubling information about the relationship between Rochelle and Michael, emphasizing that Michael had long exhibited signs of extremist thinking, frequently immersing himself in distorted beliefs about evil forces and claiming that he possessed the ability to drive demonic presences out of a living space.
And he was seriously deep into the dark side of things. And when you've been hearing that for so long, over and over and over and over, every single day for years, yeah, it pretty much gets to you. After she had told me what she had initially told me, I said, you better run because he's crazy.
During the trial, Michael's defense team presented text messages and journal entries written by Rochelle after Bella's death, in which she continued to refer to Michael in affectionate terms. And the attorneys argued that this demonstrated he was not the one who caused the tragedy. They also contended that Rochelle had been the dominant figure in the relationship and attempted to shift the focus of responsibility onto her. Although Michael was initially charged at the most serious level, the judge allowed the jury to consider lesser charges, including a lower degree of responsibility and conduct, resulting in unintended consequences. On June 26, 2017, the jury returned a verdict finding Michael McCarthy responsible at the second degree, and 2 days later, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the earliest possibility of parole set for the year 2037. Years later, on June 10, 2021, that sentence was upheld when Michael's appeal to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court was denied, effectively closing the legal path available to him. Michael did say a few words.
Did you kill Bella?
Never. I never harmed a hair on her head. You know, she was a beautiful, happy, healthy little girl. They were saying that, I essentially believed that Bella Bond was inhabited by demons.
Did you think Bella was a demon?
Of course not. She was a beautiful little girl. The state police swept the refrigerator and they said there was never a body in the refrigerator. And they swept my car and they said there was never a body in his vehicle either.
On June 27, 2017, Rochelle chose to remain in custody after being informed that a substance treatment facility had declined to accept her. By July 12th, she was placed on probation under strict conditions, including a prohibition on using harmful substances or alcohol, along with multiple additional supervision requirements. Rochelle was subsequently released from the Suffolk County House of Correction, and since that time, her current place of residence has not been publicly disclosed.
I mean, she's relieved it's over. She certainly is relieved that Michael McCarthy was convicted. That was very important to her. And she was relieved that people believed her. That was also important to her. In terms of her future, she's scared. You all know that she could have walked out of this courtroom, about 10 days ago, free and clear, and she didn't want to do that. So she is scared about her future. She has a future without her child. And regardless of what people think about her involvement or not, she grieves the loss of that child every single day. I mean, she's likely to stay here. I think that she'd like to avoid locations where she was able to connect for drugs. I think she really wants a fresh start. So there are plenty of places in Massachusetts where she could do that.
By August 17, 2018, Rochelle, who was then living in Worcester, was back in court for violating the conditions of her probation after testing positive for a stimulant that was not medically prescribed. Despite being explicitly ordered to abstain from harmful substances and alcohol. After Bella's case was legally resolved, her grandmother, Patricia Quinn, and her biological father, Joseph Amoroso, each shared their thoughts publicly. Contrary to some circulating claims, Patricia was not unaware of her granddaughter's existence until the tragedy, as she had met Bella approximately 2 years before the child's death.
Oh, I just miss her so much. I really do. It's just ridiculous. It's horrible.
According to Patricia Quinn, the last time she saw her granddaughter was more than 2 years earlier, when Bella was only about 8 months old. She also said that shortly before the truth came to light, Rochelle had returned to the house without the child, and it was not until the following day through television news reports that she was stunned to realize the tragedy had in fact occurred.
I was watching the breaking news, and Bella came on, and Rochelle was sitting there and said, "That's my daughter, Bella."
Bella's biological father, Joseph Amoroso, stated that he heard Rochelle's admission about what had happened the night before the information was officially made public.
I didn't have to. The authorities were all over the investigation. The warrants had already been sent out.
District Attorney Dan Conley.
He certainly should have picked up the phone and done something earlier, but from a criminal responsibility point of view, there aren't statutes that would be applicable here.
Of course I have regrets. Absolutely.
On November 28, 2015, Bella was laid to rest at Winthrop Cemetery, bringing her short life to a close with a solemn and quiet service. Her headstone bears the image of a sleeping angel, a small kitten, and a photograph of Bella with her hair tied high atop her head, engraved with the words, "Our Special Angel," and her name was also inscribed on the Sennett family grave, formally restoring her identity. Nearby, along the shoreline of Deer Island, where Bella's remains were discovered, a small memorial was later erected in her memory, featuring a bronze plaque that reads that, for reasons that may never be fully explained, an angel came and left from this shore, leaving behind sorrow, but also a promise that Bella would not be forgotten. As I close this case, what I see is not only a chain of heartbreaking events, but a stark warning about the dangerous gaps in family responsibility, social oversight, and the ways we so often overlook warning signs that are right in front of us. A small life was lost among adults who should have protected her, leaving behind a haunting question of how many similar tragedies may have quietly occurred without anyone ever knowing. To me, this story is a reminder that indifference, fear, and silence can be just as destructive as direct wrongdoing, and that each of us carries a responsibility to speak up when something feels wrong. Thank you for listening to today's story with True Crime Documentary. If you have any thoughts or emotions you'd like to share, please leave a comment below as a way to remember the victim. And don't forget to share the video so this story can reach more people. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to continue accompanying me through future cases. Thank you. And I'll see you in the next episodes.